All right, everybody. I know there's still folks joining, but I think in the considerations of everybody's time, we will get started. Welcome. I appreciate you joining us this morning. A quick couple notes before we get started, as we're all pretty used to this now, but I'll say please enter questions in the chat as we're going forward. We have some people looking at the chat, so we will make sure that those get seen. There's also time at the end of the webinar to specifically walk through questions. Either one is fine. And everything will be available, including the recording and the slides after the webinar. So these will be available for reference. And I think there's a few slides that are more useful for that. All right. Okay, so who's talking to you today? My name is Katherine Riley. I'm the INCITE Program Manager. I'll do sort of the start and sort of quick overview and wrap up on the webinar, but we will also have Marta Garcia and Dymtro Bykov speaking from Argonne and Oak Ridge respectively, and they're going to walk through a little bit more detail about what we need in the proposals and what the resources are that are available for the coming INCITE call. All right, so the objectives here today are really for a bit of a deep dive into the different components of an INCITE proposal and what we're really expecting out of those and the resources that are available. So we're going to walk through those sections and give you sort of a sense of what you really want to think about when you're putting that proposal together. An important note for timelines for everybody on the call, the new proposals are due on the 17th of June. If you are a renewal proposal, and that means that you already have an INCITE proposal, you are awarded multiple years, and so you're going into 2023 with a renewal, those are due later. Those are due on July 22nd. And if you have a question about whether you are a renewal or not, you can reach out to me. There will also be a mail going out imminently, which is sort of a reminder of saying to you as a PI, you do qualify for a renewal. And so, feel free to submit. You will be notified of awards in November, and then that starts the allocation year in January. As I mentioned, there are newer renewals. There will be a little bit more detail about this, but if you are a new PI, so you do not have a current active proposal, then you want to submit a new proposal, right? That's pretty much straightforward. You can request a 1, 2, or 3-year proposal. And I highly recommend, as this will come up as you're thinking about that, if you're asking for a multi-year, thinking about, how an awards committee might make changes, right? If we couldn't award 3 years, if we could award 2 years, think about that as you're putting together your plan. And as I mentioned, the renewals are those PIs who have current active proposals who are awarded a 2 or 3 year originally, and so they're working into, another year or another 2 years. So the quick agenda for today, we're going to walk through the allocation program, the overview of what INCITE is, and perhaps whether what you're thinking about might be appropriate for INCITE, and then some statistics and just some general things. Walk through the systems that are available through the INCITE program, and then give you some tips for your proposal. And this will be in the structure of sort of what we're asking for in terms of what's in the proposal itself. Then there'll be a quick Q&A, as I mentioned, right? So anything that we did not address during the webinar, we will get to at the very end. A few things for those who are returned PIs and proposal writers. We always sort of have some things just to call out at the very beginning, and these are really great references later. But some of these are new for this year. And so the primary thing that's new in the 2023 call for INCITE is your ability to request access to testbed systems at both leadership computing facilities. Argonne has an AI testbed. OLCF has a quantum testbed. There's more information about these, but fundamentally, these are not going to be part of your large chunk of time. But in terms of exploring new hardware, if there is something that is complementary to your proposal and you think it would be really useful or interesting in order to explore that in the AI or quantum testbeds, you can request that. And it's a separate part of your proposal. It doesn't contribute to sort of your page limits. And in terms of the page limits, I just keep reminding people of this, is that all materials are concatenated together. So all of the things we're going to ask you for will be put into a single PDF. As I mentioned, we have the new testbed systems that people will be able to request time on. These are really, as I said, meant to be exploratory systems. These tend to be relatively modest in size. They are to explore new hardware in the AI and quantum side. And so there's more information following through on these links, and we can also discuss that in the course of the webinar. Sorry. All right. One of the other changes in this coming year is resources and what's available. So Polaris, which was available but a much more mysterious machine in the last call, is available for a full INCITE year in 2023. Frontier is also available for a full allocation year. Aurora will be available, but it will probably be during the last part of the year. So it will be not something that we are awarding giant awards on. It'll be more like if you're targeting Aurora and you have work you want to do, I highly encourage you to express interest in Aurora. And then you will probably be able to get access to it at the end of the award year. One thing that was new in 2022 was the early career track. That is still there. Haven't made any changes. There'll be a little bit more discussion about this later, but for the most part, still there. If you're within your first 10 years of getting your PhD, you should consider this. All right, so a quick overview for the leadership class facilities. That 60% of the resources, of all of these resources that we're going to be talking about today, are up to 60% go to the INCITE program. 30% of that remaining part, 30% goes to our program office, to Oscar in the Department of Energy, and that goes to their program, the Oscar Leadership Computing Challenge. They use normally about 20% of that for that separate call. And then the other 10% of that is used for the ECP program. And then 10% is used for director's discretionary. So these are really strategic programs that both facilities are running, but also proposal preparation. And we will get back to that later, but I highly recommend, if you do not already have a director's discretionary and you're considering a proposal, to look into a discretionary proposal, a discretionary time. But what is INCITE, right? We're talking about this and really, what are we focused on? INCITE is an acronym because we work for the DOE, so it's important that we have acronyms. And it stands for Innovative and Novel Computational Impact on Theory and Experiment. But fundamentally, what we're looking for are projects that are doing research in science and technology that really require a substantial amount of computing or data capability. They would not be able to achieve their goals without access to some of the largest systems in the world. We strive to provide awards that are substantially larger than you would be able to get at other facilities on both the compute and the data side. All right. Generally, INCITE has been really broad in its domain areas. It is not sort of limited to one particular area. We have had emerging areas, right? When I started with INCITE, which was at the very beginning of the INCITE program, biology, for example, was an incredibly small part of the program. It is now quite large and one of our largest panels when we're doing the review. So really, there's no specific area of research that dominates the INCITE program. It is really diverse. So what are some of the criteria to think about? Really, the primary criteria to think about if you are contemplating whether you're appropriate for INCITE is whether you have a research campaign that has potential for significant impact. Impact is defined in a broad variety of ways. That can be impact because there's a finding you're looking for, right? There are results that your community's been looking for a long time, or that would have a large impact if you found them. But it can also be a large impact because you're generating a data set that people will be able to make immense use out of. So there's no single definition of impact. It's not just a single result that we define as impact. The second criteria, as I mentioned, is that you are looking to run a campaign that you would really not be able to do elsewhere. Now that can be because you need such a large amount of computational capability or data capability, but it could be that there's something specific to the architectural needs at the ALCF, or that you're looking to do some sort of learning capabilities at scale, and you really need the leadership computing capabilities in order to do that. And the third is your eligibility criteria. And I want to emphasize that anyone can apply for an INCITE award. You can apply regardless of your funding source, regardless of where you are. So non-US based researchers are welcome to apply. Industry is welcome to apply. There is a twofold review process. The most impactful part of that review process is your peer review process. And so this is where we have a panel of scientific experts who come in and help us determine the appropriateness of your proposal and the impact of your proposal. So really what we're looking for is, is what you're doing appropriate in the domain? Is it going to be, is your approach right for the type of problem you're going to solve? Do you have a clear set of milestones that convince them that, okay, yeah, you really know how to actually accomplish your goal? Do you have the right team in place? And are the amount of resources commensurate with what you are asking to do? The second phase of the review is the computational readiness review. And this is where the facilities are looking to make sure that you are ready to use a leadership computing resource, meaning that you have made sure that your applications are ready to run, that you know what really is required of you, that you've made appropriate estimations of your time. Really, the primary thing to remember is that the scientific review is the primary thing. The computational readiness review is really a risk assessment in the awards process. The renewals assessment is different. So if you do have a multi-year award, really what we're looking for in the renewal assessment is that you have met your milestones, that you haven't changed scope of your research. So that's really a very different type of approach, right? A different type of review. And additionally, in the CR and the computational readiness side, again, this is similar, right? We're making sure that you've met your technical milestones and that you are on track to keep moving forward. I'll get back to this later, but the award decisions are made primarily by the awards committee. This is the LCF director, so the directors for the ALCF and OLCF, the program manager, me, and the directors of science, along with input from senior management from both facilities. So there are a few limitations about what can be done. And they really only stem from federal law, and this really is stemming from cybersecurity issues. So really it's rooted in the kind of information we can or cannot have. We cannot have PII, we cannot have unclassified controlled nuclear information, things of this order. And we actually ask this in the proposal. We ask you to think about that. If you do work with sensitive data, to think carefully about whether you have to have that. And so then you might not be appropriate, but I also encourage anyone who thinks they have this information to reach out to me, and me as the program manager, me as the director of science for the ALCF, or Bronson Messer as the director of science for the OLCF, and just sort of walk through it and make sure, right, that you fall under one of these more restricted categories and that there's nothing else we could do to support you. We also do support proprietary work. It is less common, but we do see it with some industry users. And the short version of this is that if you are not intending to publish the work that you are going to generate through INCITE, if it will not move into the open science community, then you need to be considered for a proprietary user agreement. And this is really cost recovery. And again, if you are considering that you might fall into this category, please talk to me. Often we find a completely appropriate way where this does not have to be cost recovery, but we really need to have that conversation really before awards are made, so we understand what we're walking into and what you might be facing. Another piece of guidance that I really wanted to touch on for people to think about is community versus umbrella proposals, and I'll define those. So we encourage community proposals, and this is where you have a community in a particular domain or subdomain, and you have a consensus on how to tackle a particular problem, and you're coordinating and working together to do that. The reason that can work is normally there is an approach to tackling a problem, and you're able to really support each other and create a cohesive story about what your science plan might be. We do not encourage umbrella proposals, and there is a little bit of a continuum, it's not like a hard black line between community and umbrella, but I'll define what we don't really encourage in terms of umbrella proposals. And so these tend to be proposals that are made up of very individual, less connected parts. So you can imagine if 5 PIs came together and they each had five research campaigns that were similar, right? And they were putting it together to reach sort of some of these criteria for INCITE, but really they didn't depend on each other. They were relatively decoupled. The reason we don't encourage that type of proposal is it's very hard for our reviewers to make an appropriate assessment, because in the case of, say, 5 individual projects, you're splitting that science description, you're just splitting your approach and your campaign description in, you're splitting 5 things into 15 pages versus another proposal that's got, one targeted mission. It might be a community working together to do it that's committing 15 pages to, a single type of problem. When you have that difference, only a few paragraphs on a particular problem versus a whole proposal, making those comparisons is very, very difficult and results in a bit of a challenge. And as a result, right, it tends to be that those proposals that are able to dig in deeper and make their case better are more successful. All right, so a few statistics. For the 2022 INCITE Awards, we had a 3 to 4.5, depending on how you break it down and exactly what resource you're looking at, 3 to 4.5 times those are oversubscription based on requests. And so this means that if you look at the total time requested across the INCITE program, we were very oversubscribed. There were a lot of demands for time. There were 53 projects awarded, 15 of which were renewals, and 35, and perhaps most relevant if you're thinking about a new proposal, is that 35% of non-renewal submittals were accepted. So that means that if you were writing a new proposal, there was a little bit over a 30% acceptance rate. And I do apologize if people are hearing mewing in the background. Sometimes my computer picks this up and sometimes it does not, but there are kittens angry that they're there outside the door right now. The other thing is to give you a sense of affiliations for lead PIs. We have a lot of university PIs and government. In this case, government really means national labs or federal agencies like NASA or the NIH. Foreign is actually smaller this year than it has been historically, meaning these are just PIs located, in other countries. So it was a smaller fraction than we've seen in some points in the past. All right, and some other statistics. So last year we awarded Summit, Theta, and Polaris only. And this gives you a sense of, sort of numbers that we were talking about. On Summit, there were 37 projects, Theta 17, and Polaris, which is only going to be available for about a little over maybe half the INCITE year, was awarded 11. Really on Summit, we were looking at $500,000 for the average project size. On Theta, these were more like $1 to $1.25 million in terms of size. For the Polaris projects, these are not necessarily representative, as we were very reduced in the total time we were making available because there were no details that we could make available for Polaris at the time. And actually, I'll hop back and say, to be aware of this, right, that you are more than able to request time on multiple systems. So as I mentioned, there were 53 projects. Some have time on Theta and Summit, some have time across all 3. So you are able to request multiple resources as long as you're able to make the case for why you need those resources. The other valuable one I find for people considering new proposals is that 42% of the PIs had never led an INCITE proposal last year. So there were 106 new proposals and 45 were led by new PIs. And 26% of the non-renewal projects were awarded to completely new PIs. And then some breakdown of the science panels. As I mentioned, that these are the root of our review. This is the root of, understanding whether your proposal is competitive or not. These are panels grouped by domain. Last year, we had 92 science experts. Our goal is we're really putting proposals that are like with like. We had a really diverse set of reviewers from all across the world. And really, these are people with incredibly prestigious CVs and a lot of background in the areas that we're talking to them. We do have carryover from year to year. So there are always new reviewers coming in, but the goal is that we have some historical memory as we're going through from one year to another. We also have a data and learning panel, and what we have there is a panel that reviews not just proposals that are entirely focused on data and learning technologies or approaches or methods, but also they review proposals that have a significant data and learning component to just sort of do a sanity check that methodology, that application is reasonable. I mentioned earlier about the early career path, and this was new last year and was incredibly successful. I was really excited by both the turnout and the quality of the early career proposals. So this is to support the next generation of researchers. If you are within 10 years of getting your PhD, you may apply within the early career path. It can help secure you an award, because we're really looking to award up to 10% of allocatable hours to those within their early career. I will say last year, the early career proposals were incredibly competitive, right? We didn't have to necessarily dig deep to give an award. People did a fantastic job and really, as early career researchers, wrote fantastic proposals. I've mentioned the resources a few times, but to make a couple things explicitly clear, in 2023, you will be able to request Theta and Summit, but only for one-year proposals. As of now, Theta and Summit are looking at their last year within the INCITE program. In the 2024-2025 years, that will be exclusively Frontier, Polaris, and Aurora. And here's just some estimations of project sizes, which you can look back and reference. Again, right, I want you to realize that we're looking at awarding significantly larger projects than you would normally be able to get at other resources. All right, and at this, I'm going to hand off to Dima from the OLCF, and they're going to walk through in a little bit more detail about all of these resources and any questions you might have on them.
All right, thanks, Katherine. So I'll just quickly introduce resources available at Oak Ridge. And at Oak Ridge, we are running our production machine called Summit. We have been running it for a few years now, very successfully. So this is a 200 petaflop machine with a combined node count roughly 4,600. And this is an IBM machine with NVIDIA hardware, with NVIDIA GPUs. So each node has 2 IBM Power 9 processors on the CPU sides, plus 6 NVIDIA Volta GPUs. So the node performance is 42 teraflops. Powerful nodes also with lots of memory, where we have on the DDR side 512 gigabytes, and on the GPU side is another 96 gigabytes of HBM2 memory. So we also have non-volatile memory per node, which is amounts to 1.6 terabytes. So GPU connected through the NVLink 2.0, and the machine, all the nodes connected through the Mellanox non-blocking tree, FAT3 topology, dual rail, infinite band interconnect. So the total memory is more than 10 petabytes, and the file system is 250 petabytes with a speed of 2.5 terabytes per second. So this is just a snapshot, and you can, of course, follow the link down at this slide and find out all the details. Okay, next slide. So the Summit has, at this point, well-established software ecosystems. So basically, we can accommodate almost all requests from the users. And again, this is just a snapshot to highlight most common tools on the machine. So obviously, on the compiler side, it's an IBM machine. So we have Excel, but we also have PGI and NVIDIA compilers. Well, PGI is all NVIDIA as well, LLVM and GNU. So on the library side, we have all the common libraries to support the scientific or engineering application. Well, obviously, again, ESSL from IBM, but also Fourier transform, LabPAC, linear algebra stuff, 3 Linux BLAS, different level BLAS, NV BLAS, and also, of course, NVIDIA libraries like QFFT, QSparse, and so on. On the debugging side, we have a linear DDT, very good for parallel debugging. So we also have IBM parallel environment runtime, PDB, and we have, again, NVIDIA tools like CUDA, GDB, CUDA memcheck, as well as others like Wellgrind, memcheck, and so on. On the profiling, we have IBM Parallel Environment Developer Edition. So it's HPC Toolkit. We have also other tools like well-established community tools like Vampire Tau, again, the HPC Toolkit, and NVIDIA NVProf and INCITE Compute. Well, basically a full stack. So we also have development support for the HIP and ROCm for those projects which are looking forward to run on the frontier. And we also support machine and deep learning workflows and then applications. For that, we have, well, all the popular frameworks like TensorFlow, PyTorch. We have Python libraries, NVIDIA machine learning tools like Rapids and IBM Watson. So on. We have also visualization tools like ParaView, Visit, and we have workflows available for you. Again, that is just an overview, and you can follow the link down there. And you can also contact the centers because we, in vast majority of the cases, we can accommodate your request. All right, next one. Okay, so as Katherine already mentioned, the Frontier is our new machine, our exascale era machine, which is coming and will be available for the INCITE. So here's an overview of the specs for that machine. It's more than 1.5 exaflop, and that is AMD built machine, AMD hardware, both on the CPU and GPU side. We'll have one HPC and AI optimized AMD EPIC CPU. Each one has 64 cores, plus 4 purpose-built AMD Instinct MI250 GPUs. So the number of nodes will be 9,408. And CPU and GPU will be talking through the AMD Infinite Fabric with coherent memory access. And then the system interconnect will be a slingshot, so-called Dragonfly topology network. Well, we also will have a new storage system, which will be 2 to 4 times performance of the current Summit's I/O. So again, there's a link there at the bottom of the slide. Please follow it. So just like a little bit of caution, yes, Frontier is almost there, and there's a lot of information has been released already, but maybe not all of that. So some of them it could be still under NDA, but the Frontier is coming, and we're really looking forward to that. Okay, so those are the resources we are having for the INCITE from the OLCF on the Oak Ridge side, and I think Marta will continue with the Oregon.
Before we move on, actually, Dima, there was a great question, which was how should people demonstrate readiness for Frontier? Should they use Crusher results, or should they try to get Summit results with NVIDIA backend?
Well, that is a common question. Yes, basically, if you have access to the testbeds, of course, that would help. If not, Summit has a heap installed, so that is also totally valid.
Katherine, do you want to address the other question, or should I continue?
Oh, I'm sorry. I answered it. I answered it in the chat, but the question was, but you're right, Marta, thank you. And that was, can PIs apply for early career if their co-Is might not be early career? And the answer is yes. That absolutely is fine. The thing that we're looking for is that the early career person is really driving that proposal, right? That they are the driving force behind it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dima. Thanks, Katherine. So let's start talking about the 3 machines, the 3 resources that we have at the ALCF. The first one is Theta. It's our current production system. I was checking, it started in November 2016. It went into the top 500. So it's several years that it has been already available. Since day one, it was the mission is to facilitate the transition to the upcoming Aurora machine and enable workflows at larger scale, such as those involving data and learning methods. It's a machine with 11 petaflops intercray system consisting of 4,392 nodes with second generation Intercion 5 processors, codenamed Nice Landing. Some of you probably have been using it already. Each node on Theta has 64 cores and a memory hierarchy also consisting of 3 kind of memory. You have 16 gigabytes of high bandwidth memory, 192 gigabytes of DDR4, and also you have available SSD for those who are using this kind of memory, 128 gigabytes, which can be particularly helpful for data-centric workflows. As Katherine mentioned, this is a machine that will be only available for next year. So you probably want to start transitioning to the new system, but still there are some similarities. So Theta, we have the network gray areas, and we have also the Dragonfly topology that will be available on Polaris. We have 2 new file systems that are currently mounted on Theta that you will be using also with the other machines, is Gran and Eagle, each one with 100 petabytes. And the projects also have access to an x86 system named Coolie to facilitate. This is for analysis and visualization of your scientific results from Theta. In addition to that, you have also HPSS type archive that can be used, and the file system from Grand and Eagle is Lustre. And similar to last year, we are anticipating typical allocations for Theta to be on the order of 1.5 to 2.5 millions. Katherine had one of the presentations with average, and now we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Katherine. This is the current Cray programming environment that is available to Theta users, in addition to the number of other software, tools, and libraries. So over the years, there is a lot of documentation that has been included on the website. This is just the link at the bottom is just the entry point, but we have a lot of web pages available. If there is something that you cannot find, please let us know. The standard, we have a standard distributed and shared programming models that are available, MPI, OpenMP, obviously, and several C, C++, and Fortran compilers, as well as in other machines, optimized libraries and debugging, performance and profiling analysis tools. This is just a summarized list. We have also software available for machine deep learning and workflows. You have Singularity, you have Balsam. You might be, which is a good solution for you to consider for ensemble jobs. In cases of your interest. And we obviously encourage you at any time, particularly in data science and AI variety, to check if the software is available on the system, on this system on Theta, on any of the systems, and you can reach out to us in case you cannot find it, or to find out if it's possible to install it. Next, please. Thank you so much. So this is Polaris. As Katherine was mentioned, last year it was a mystery machine. We just were able to say that it was hybrid, CPU and GPU, without even the possibility to mention what kind of system. So now we have, this is a summarized slide. And in fact, last week we had a presentation at the ALCF with Kevin Harms and Brian Homerding, and they were presenting exclusively Polaris. So it's not yet available on the website, but as soon as it's there, we can also send you the link. It's very useful because it contains much more information. So let me go broadly to the main details of this system. It's a hybrid CPU and GPU. Leading edge testbed system is HPE Apollo 6500 Gen 10 Plus for more details. It's especially there for application developers as a platform to test and optimize codes for Aurora. So Polaris will be available from day 1, 2023. It's already soon will be already available for users, but at least with respect to this call for the 2023 INCITE proposals will be for new and renewals, obviously. So if you're thinking on applying for a renewal and then you didn't include it, you should potentially consider it now that you know probably the system, and you will be able to take advantage more of that machine if your code can compile and can run appropriately. So we are talking about 44 petaflops double precision with peak power less than 2 megawatts or 1.8 megawatts. So it's a very compact and very efficient machine. We have two kind of memories, DDR4, 280 terabytes. We have a high bandwidth memory, HBM2, with 87.5. But again, there is much more detail in the presentation that was done last week. This is very broad. The point to know is eventually what kind of processor, for example, is you have AMD's EPYC Milan. That is, I think that they finalized the upgrade, but they were in Rome and they are going to Milan, and also the number of nodes of the whole machine. We are talking about 560 nodes with those hybrid 1 CPU, 4 GPUs. And for the interconnect, we have HP Slingshot on Dragonfly topology. Next, please. Thank you. This is, again, very briefly, but at least a high-level summary of the programming environment that you will have, or you can expect to have on Polaris. You have HPE Cray programming environment available, also NVIDIA, HPC SDK, and SQL DPC++ for those who would like to go through that route with CodePlay or LLVM compilers. And programming models, we have OpenMP, obviously 4.5 or 5 and greater, DPC++ and SQL, Cocos for performance portability layers, Raya 2, HIP. And regarding performance, profiling, and debugging tools, a wide variety. You have obviously GPU tools. We have PAPI, Tau, HPC Toolkit, and particularly Cray performance analysis tools, also NVIDIA INCITE and DDT for those who like that kind of interface, the GDB4, HPC. Well, a lot of software available for you to debug and profile your code appropriately. And those who are focused on frameworks, we have also Python, Numba, TensorFlow, PyTorch, and Cray, and also the HP AI stack available. Next, please. Now the third resource available, Aurora. So Aurora is coming soon to the ALCF, and it's an exascale architecture designed for simulation, data, and learning. We cannot provide more details of what we have here or what is available on the website, but we are expecting, obviously, to have a machine with a sustained double precision performance of more than 2 exaflops that we will deliver. We are going to have 2 Intel Xeon CPU cores and 6 Intel GPUs. So the ratio is not exactly the same as, it's not the same, it's 2 to 6 instead of for Polaris 1 to 4, but you have the same ratio on Summit. And similar to Frontier, Aurora's network is going to be the HPE Slingshot fabrics with Dragonfly topology. So if you are thinking also on submitting on different leadership class systems, it's important to understand what are the similarities, at least with respect to what your code is going to perform or what you expect to get from the machines. There is a particularity in Aurora. We will have DEOs that will be a key component for delivering the high performance that we require for I/O, for the data intensive workflows, and also for some of the simulation ones, especially I remember some of the astrophysics, they are very high number of percentage in the simulation for respect to I/O. It's a machine that is expected to have more than 9,000 compute nodes. We cannot share more about exactly the number, but at least with expecting node performance on the order of 130 teraflops. Next, please. And this is, again, very broad, but regarding the programming environments and the models that we expect to have on Aurora, at least it's going to consist of HPE Cray XC software stack, Intel software, and a number of data and learning frameworks that have been optimized for Intel hardware. Additionally, there are several programming models. Some of them are listed here, but we encourage you, our website is always up to date and making sure that we share the information as soon as possible. So with respect to Aurora, I will encourage you to follow the aurora.alcf.anl.gov for the latest information on what is publicly available. For the 2023 INCITE proposal submission, so the PIs, as Katherine was mentioned, are encouraged to express their interest in Aurora for the next year cycle. And for future years, you will probably, we will be requested to revisit your allocation. We understand that you don't have access now to this particular system, so you will need in the future, probably with the transition with Polaris, it will be easier to get better estimation of what to expect of the system, how much you need for your science to be successful. And now we can start, if you want, next page, with the key questions that you need to ask yourself. So we are starting to look at the proposal submission. What is important? What do we, as reviewers from the science panel or from the computational readiness review panel, what is important to highlight to make sure that your proposal will be selected? So when considering if whether your project is appropriate for the INCITE program, so there are a handful of key questions. We have expressed here some of them only. So for example, is both the scale of the production runs and the time demands the problem of an LCF scale? This is important to address. So if the work that you are proposing could easily be done and completed in a smaller scale, like in a university cluster or machine, then the INCITE program might not be the right choice for you. However, if the resource allocation needs are substantially larger than available anywhere else, and the science runs are too large to run on any other system, then this is one of the key components, and you have to make it sure that it's clear in your proposal submission, because that is an important element to justify that you require the INCITE resources, and INCITE is a good program, a good fit for your science. Another question to consider is whether there is unique architectural or infrastructure resources that your work requires. It is not available anywhere else. So for example, do you require these particular kind of machines, these particular GPUs? Now we always provide this diversity, so make sure that that is clearly stated. In addition to the large scale compute capabilities provided by these LCF resources, you can also spread your interest regarding the memory. You need this particular machine because of the memory that is provided, or because of the IO, the particular IO that you require and you demand in your simulation. So these are also indicators of an INCITE appropriateness. That's very useful to highlight, make sure that they are in the proposal. And it is also important to articulate in the proposal whether the team is in place. Katherine was mentioned that it's very important to say if the team, I mean, the machines don't work alone. So if the team is in place to successfully carry out the proposed science campaign, make sure that your project is successful. Next, please. Another question that you can ask yourself is regarding the data and artificial intelligence AI needs. So have strategies for workflow? Do you need particular data management or post-processing has been clearly identified? With regards to ensemble workflows, an important question to consider is how individual runs are coordinated. So if an ensemble is just run under the direction of a workflow manager that you need with a scalable IO and a parallel file system, then this ensemble is probably appropriate for LCF resources. If on the other hand, you have ensembles that are consisting of a large number of independent, possibly serial batch jobs putting together with not particular coordination, then that may be not appropriate for these kind of machines. So explaining your workflow is very important. How do you want to proceed, especially if you have multiple cases, multiple runs that you want to submit. Another question is if you have in place the data and all the data that is available, processing, are you processing, generating data? Are you creating a lot of data? Are you archiving that data? How are you moving that data? Are you sharing this with some collaborators or not? all the information that you can provide, all the details about data, the status is very useful. Providing the answers to all of these questions in your proposals is especially helpful to the reviewers for assessing the computational readiness. We look at everything, especially in the computational readiness section. We focus on making sure that your project will be ready, and if not, detecting where can we help to get you at that stage to make sure that you use efficiently or as efficiently as possible the machines, these great resources. Next, please. I don't know if most of you are coming or new PIs, the recurrent PIs or new PIs. So just to make sure, we can post the links on the chat if necessary regarding where you can find the resources. We have templates available. So in the PDF document that Katherine was mentioning at the beginning, you have to provide several pieces. That PDF is composed of an executive summary, which is 1 page. We have the bulk of the proposal, which is the project narrative with 15 pages. Then you have other elements that are also important, and everything is reviewed. So make sure that everything is as complete as possible. Personal justification and management plan. There is milestone table that will be covered also by Dima. Publications, if you are new, you probably don't have publications with INCITE awards, but if you had previous awards in the past, make sure that this information is available. And also the biosketch. For all of them, you have templates available on the website, and we can point you to them if you don't find them in Word format and also in LaTeX. Now let's start discussing important elements of this project narrative of this 15 pages document. Next, please. So getting started, make sure that you know your audience. So an important thing to remember as you start crafting your proposals is that the INCITE program is very broad in scope. Members of the science panels are drawn from national laboratories, universities, industry from all over the world. Katherine was mentioned that, and showing some statistics. And you should just not assume that the reviewers are familiar with your specific work through other programs. So make sure that you explain very well to a broad audience what do you want to accomplish. So the same is true in the computational scientists that are the leadership facilities. Reviewing the proposals for the computational readiness, that other aspect of the INCITE proposals. While the reviewers do have appropriate domain expertise, it's better to not assume that the reviewers are familiar with your specific work. They may know your code, they may not know your code, but they will be maybe knowing codes of the same scientific domain, for example. So the proposals should be written with a general audience computational scientist in mind. And remember that reviewers on the science panels will be assessing the potential impact of your work versus other submitted proposals. So it's normal you're going to be compared with proposals of in different panels, and also the same panel especially, and they will decide based on that. So we encourage you to look at the reviewer questionnaires. This is posted on the INCITE Call for Proposal website. We have a link also we can share with you. You cannot find that information. Next, please. Thank you. So what is the most important thing? Katherine was mentioned that is the impact of the work that you are proposing. The principal determinant is the successful submit, and is that. So the principal is, this cannot be stressed enough, is the impact of your work proposed. It is critically important to provide a compelling picture of the impact of your science that is accessible to researchers in your field, and as well as those outside your area of expertise. And make sure to explain the scientific challenges that you are working to overcome, their significance and the impact of your work if the computational campaign is successful. For example, if IO is an important component, obviously you have to emphasize that you will have to work or develop or consider some development work if you want to integrate DAOs into your pipeline, for example, or elements like that. So we know that the work is not perfect, and you may have to adapt part of your codes to those challenges and great machines. So it's important to share also the complexity of what you are trying to solve, and and what needs to be changed in those codes to achieve your science. It's important to place also the proposed research in the context of competing work in your field. So sometimes you have that, or most of the time you have that in articles too. So you are comparing what is in other fields. So it's imperative to justify if your proposal, what is the proposed work and why it needs to be done today in these particular machines, and not in 3 years or in a different supercomputer. Make sure that you emphasize that. Next, please. Thank you. So keeping a general audience in mind, again, you have to describe your approach to solving the science problem. So you have to make sure also that the scientific problem is clearly identified along with challenging aspects of the work and any preliminary results you may have. If you have tried that probably in another system, please make sure to share what the challenges, what needs to be adapted, what have to change, and what is this machine, what those machines can grant you to make sure that you can solve your science. So it's important to clearly map out how to request the requested resources will be used for key simulations to accomplish your particular objectives and complete the project milestones as outlined in the milestone table. The milestone table is a very important document. It's summarized very well, and over the year it has been improved to extract the main information that we need. What is the size of what is the milestone that you want to highlight? What kind of jobs do you have, the size? And Dima will go over the elements of the milestone table. The provided plan connecting resources to calculations in the support of milestones should be clearly articulated for each year of the project. So make sure that if you are applying for a multi-year cycle, that you clearly state per year what you want to accomplish. And do bear in mind that the average INCITE award of time for a single project is equivalent to several $1 million. Next, please. Regarding another important element of the narrative is the computational approach. So when it comes to describing this part, computational approach, please be sure to provide the basic foundation and key points pertaining to its formulation. So, well, the chances are high that reviewers will be familiar with the written codes and methods in your project. It is best to assume that it's not the case. It may be that you are using a particular code and you have converted it to transform it. You are using a particular branch, or so it may be that the reviewers will know the code, but maybe not specific what you are doing. So make sure that you highlight any difference. Is important for the reviewers, and be sure that to show the justification that the code you plan to use is the correct one for your research plan, and also for the machines that you are targeting. And do explain key difference if you plan to use a private modified version of a well-known code, for example, as I mentioned. Make sure to check that all programming languages, libraries, and tools that you need for your project are available on the systems that you are requesting allocation on. You probably is the case if you apply for a particular machine. We will assume that you try to request for a discretionary allocation and you are a little bit familiar with the system. But if it's not the case, make sure that at least those software that you require are available. If not, it will have to be installed, and it may be that in some cases users may need to install the software themselves. So be aware of that, especially for time consideration. And if it's unclear if something is whether some requires software is installed or not, again, please do reach out to us without any problem. To the support email, or here you can ask for clarification on what is available on LCF systems. Next, please. We continue with the computational approach. So regarding this is focused on data management and data and AI workflows. It's not an exhaustive list, just provide the basic foundation. Make sure that your project requires that you describe appropriately what your project requires for input data, how you are going to store your solutions, everything that your project requires. What is that process? How is your data management going to happen? What are your data needs regarding sizes, regarding length, time scales, and how much time those are determined. So be sure to include a description of long-term, if possible, use of the data. What's going to happen after the project is finished? Are you going to move data to your local institution? We have also, obviously, data policy available, so be aware of that. And any tools and infrastructure required to support your data needs. So we pay a lot of attention to all the details. So if you have details, please share them with us to make sure that we don't find any problem. We may find any problem, then we have time to solve it or let you know if something is missing that you require. And also include descriptions of your artificial intelligence, analytics, and visualization needs. That's very important. There is a visualization team that is always ready, available to help get your science in publications and create great animations and videos and slides for the articles, images for articles. Is a great support that is available from those facilities. Next, please. And it is important to provide detailed description of your planned computational and data intensive campaigns. And to be more precise, what are the set of your runs is presented in this slide. So how many nodes are you using for how many hours? Obviously, if you have different cases, different runs that you are running, you will have the more detail available for each one of them, the better, because you will have to justify also the number of hours that you request. So somehow you need an estimation of that number of runs, number of nodes for run, the world time that you expect to have based on estimations on the same system or a similar system. And describe if the IO, that if the result that you are sharing is with or without IO. So make sure that if the presentation contains information that is not that doesn't contain IO, that the information about how much the IO takes is also included in your estimation for the calculation of the time, to make sure that you still ask for as many hours that are required, not hours that are required. And for the output data generated, so discuss which resources will be needed to complete your analysis. For example, LCF resources, or are you gonna use a local workstation at your home institution? It depends how do you plan to manage this part of your workflow. And to mention the file protocols, if possible, that you will be using. We have Globus, in general is the one that we recommend, but you may use a different protocol for data transfer. And in any case, the machines are ready also to share your science with the public. So there are some particular notes, especially on Eagle in our case. So please remember that the details are really important, and that for your proposed runs, be sure to describe the relationship to the project milestones. The connection between the text that you put in the narrative and what we see and we compare in the milestone table is very important, and also explain that in the narrative. Next, please. Regarding the performance on the code, the performance data provided in the proposal should support the required capability scale runs and be relevant to the proposed simulation data and science runs that you are describing. So be sure to discuss how efficient the applications make use of specific architectural features. So this is important, especially now that we are moving into new GPU machines, at least with respect to Aurora. For example, express clearly if the multiple GPUs per node, how are you going to use them? For example, on Summit, or if you are using Theta, still, how are you going to use the hardware threads and the vector unit? So providing that kind of detail per machine is very important too. And it's best to generate the application performance on the resource. That was one of the questions at the beginning, in fact, and to find out, obviously, if you can try to try to get the data on the machine that you are requesting time. Just don't have surprises in how time it's going to take for you one iteration, for example, of your test case. But also similar size runs in other related resources can be useful. And be clear about the number of nodes. So we pay a lot of attention about the number of nodes, how many NPM ranks, the threads, how many GPUs are used to generate the performance data, because that is going to be an element of the evaluation. It's very important. And also the IO, if you're using, you have considering IO on your production simulation, how much it is, does it represent 5%? It's almost negligible. Are you compressing your files, or any element that you can share is very useful. Next, please. So here is just, we are presenting the application performance data in these two graphs. It's just or a weak scaling or a strong scaling is what the most relevant that we recommend for the proposed campaign. And here we have weak on the left and strong scaling performance plots on the right, and they are showing on the left. So the x-axis corresponds to the number of nodes. This is mainly what we are in general seeing. It used to be that for INCITE several years ago, it was focused on number of cores, but if you could, it's very useful for us the number of nodes, and then you provide information about, for example, like in this graph, how many ranks per node are you using, how many processes, or also how many GPUs are you using. And in the y-axis, you represent probably all the time to solution, or you can put the speed up representation. Those graphs, we pay a lot of attention, especially in the computational readiness section. Because they give us an idea of the production style that you are going to use. And if you have different runs that you're going to perform, make sure that you have available different graphs, because each one of those will show how each case is going to be run on the machine, and what is the expected performance, and if it's possible also to detect potential problems if you want to increase your size, for example. So we are here also to help and make sure that you are successful. And for each proposed application, be sure that you discuss the node level efficiencies and indicate which unknown resources are most important, or also the deficiencies. Any problem, sometimes we see you or we anticipate what is the problem before you mention it, but please feel free to share that information also with us. Next, please. Getting closer to pass to Dima at least three more slides. So regarding ensemble policy, Katherine mentioned already the difference between ensemble or umbrella at the beginning of the presentation. Those kind of runs is important to share. How do you plan to submit the application? If it's a collection of independent or loosely coupled calculation, then it can be helpful to discuss what could we do to change that workflow and make it more adapted to the machines. So if it's the size of the ensemble is such that a reasonable time to solution can only be achieved by running on a large scale resource, and the volume of the work is facilitated by the workflow manager, then the ensemble you are proposing is likely appropriate for INCITE. So we have, and we can help you get improve your workflow too. However, if you are considering members of ensemble, as she was mentioning, effectively carry out on a smaller scale, then the ensemble may not be adapted for INCITE. So we encourage all projects considering ensemble workflows to refer to we have an FAQ webpage also. In these tips on the top right, you see it's number 33, but we have other FAQs that could be useful to go over, especially if you are new in INCITE proposal. Next, please. And just last two slides, at least from my side, regarding data and artificial intelligence application. So just a few words. In addition to the traditional computationally intensive simulation problems, that projects that we have seen recently, or at least until now, So the INCITE program encourages and supports data and AI campaigns. And we have seen an increase over the years. Obviously, the machines are getting ready for to capture and make sure that they use this kind of appropriately this kind of machine. So the proposals in these areas should contain, if you plan to submit in this area, should contain strong aspects of scalable data processing and how to employ the AI methods at the scale of these leadership computing resources. So this is very important. And the examples of the capabilities that are employed by data and AI projects include, but just a list here. I'm not certainly limited to what you see in this slide. And we have a lot of areas that are growing over the years. So the list of examples is not complete. And I'm sure that it will continue to grow as large scale data and AI capabilities continue to mature. So we have seen an increase from last year, and hopefully in the next year we will see a higher increase too. So the INCITE program does indeed receive strong proposals as having significant data and AI components. And these proposals are evaluated by a data and AI panel, in fact, one of the scientific panels. Next, please. And just, I think it's my last slide. Yes, so the recipe for success when it comes to a data and AI centric proposal is really no different from that of a traditional simulation proposal. So make sure that if you are applying simulation, data, or learning, it doesn't matter, the recipe is the same. So the proposals should clearly articulate the objective of the planned work, and you have to provide details on dependencies for the complete end-to-end research campaign. So you have to make sure that you present the code, that you present your research, that you present the approach, the computational readiness part, everything for all the three space pillars of these machines should be as completely as articulated and detailed as possible. A full list of applications requires should be provided in the proposal. So make sure that everything that you need is all the codes or the software that you require is clearly explained, including as appropriate databases, learning frameworks, workflow managers, even container solutions, and so on. So make sure that all is clearly included, as is the case for other simulation projects that require other kind of software. And it's best to generate the performance data for your data on the machine that you're currently running, and running at a scale if possible. But for this reason, it is especially beneficial to PIs considering data and or AI-centric proposals to request director discretionary allocation. If you didn't have the opportunity to do so, you still have time. The call will close for new proposals, as Katherine was mentioned, is June 17. So if you didn't have the opportunity, we have links in this presentation and also on the website that contains the request for director discretionary allocations on the different systems. So make sure that at least you give it a try if you didn't have the opportunity to create those plots, or to at least try what is on the system for your science. And with this, I will pass it back to Dima, except if there is any question that you want me to address.
One thing I might mention, that there's been a few sort of questions about this, but we can get back to making the readiness case for Frontier, even at the end of the webinar as well, to sort of dig into that. I know Dima's been doing a great job sort of tackling those in the chat. And one thing I'll comment on is there was sort of a question of, okay, can you request Summit for just your Summit proposals only encouraged or allowed? And they absolutely are. Just be aware for Summit and Theta, those are 1 year, right? So you won't get multi-years. And you can express interest, right? And say, if you're requesting a Summit award and you want to get ready for Frontier, you may absolutely ask for a small sort of development award in your INCITE proposal for Frontier. And then really, that's really valuable for us. It's all in one place. You can sort of see that you're interested in moving forward and getting ready for that. It might get turned into a DD by us, but that's fine, right? That's just sort of how we might do bookkeeping in the background. But you absolutely can request sort of development time, right? Can I have a small award to get ready?
Okay. All right.
That was all I had.
Yeah, I can continue from there. Yeah, so we have to discuss a couple of more points about the narrative, and one of these points is the development work. So in general, development work is welcome. So it's fine to have a development component inside your INCITE proposal, but please describe this additional development you are actually planning. And also very important, do not forget to allocate actual computational resources for that development, which people quite often forget. Okay, next one. Okay. So management plan, that's also part of your narrative, part of your INCITE proposal. So that is the part where the experience and credibility will be highlighted, shown. So please list the scientific and technical members and their experience. Well, obviously in the relation to the proposal scientific goals. So also successful proposal teams demonstrate a clear understanding of petascale computing and can optimally use these resources to accomplish the stated scientific goals. Okay, important point, the team members can be part of different proposals. Well, important also that you should show that you will use the time transparently. So project involving multiple teams or different thrust areas should clearly state how the allocation will be distributed among those teams and thrusts. So the tip here, so do include in personal justification a brief description of the role of each team member. Although it's not a requirement, proposal with application developers or clear connection to development teams are favorably viewed by the CR team, Computational Readiness team. Okay, so that's a management plan. Next one will be a milestone table. Again, that's an integral component. So it's important to remember, if you are not including milestone table, your proposal may be rejected. So please do not forget to include that. And in your milestone table, please clearly state the scientific and technical milestones for each year of your proposed work. So those milestones should be arranged. So, well, they should be appropriate, obviously in size and duration for your requested computational resources. And the future modification in scope, they will be tracked according to your milestone table. So as appropriate details to provide in each milestones, they are computing resource and allocation request in node hours, production size runs, number of nodes, file system and archival storage and duration, software application employed, summary of the computational tasks, for example, computational runs, data analysis, data reduction, post-processing, pre-processing, whatever. Then dependencies on or between other milestones. And the last one is expected start, target completion date, and status. Well, you don't have to have all those points in your particular application, but if you hit majority of them, that should give you a good milestone table. All right, next one. Okay, so one more point here is INCITE publications. Clearly, we benefit greatly from highlighting your research, highlighting your accomplishments on our machines. So that's why please do report publications resulting from INCITE allocations. So it's also very important for the DOE, because that's how they also justify the whole program INCITE. So what is important to remember here, that you should always include the INCITE acknowledgements. So they're very easy to find on our web pages. And please include those publications which have actually that acknowledgement. So just don't put any related publications, but those which contain that acknowledgements. All right, so that's World INCITE publications. And the next one will be an annual timeline overview. So this is a slide more or less for having a general overview, basically something to keep in mind. But the important point is that the actual dates, they change and shift a little bit from year to year. So please always know the exact date. So this year, again, Katherine, she has mentioned that already. The INCITE dates are June 17th for the new and July 22nd for the renewal proposals. So important to remember. But this is just a general overview that we have 3 stages, which the first one is solicitation and review, and then the next selection, and access and monitoring comes after that. Usually solicitation is April to July. Then we have a computational readiness, usually happening in July, August. Then we have the panel reviews from the scientific panel reviews happening September up to October. Then the selection procedure starts, where both centers work on the portfolio they want to support through the INCITE program. Awards are usually announced in the very beginning of November. Then the technical work starts, like access processing, they are finding liaisons and so on. And then, of course, the 1st of January, everything is fine. You can start your calculations. So that's the annual timeline. And the next one. Yeah, so basically, if you, at this point, ask yourself, am I ready to apply? So there maybe there's a few points which can help you to decide. So first of all, have you ported your code? Well, that's obviously, but sometimes maybe you're just using a community code. So it helps just to Google around. Maybe there's a version already available which can run on the machine. If not, or if you're a developer yourself, then you can request a startup account if needed. And we'll talk about that on the next page. So you should also, to be ready to INCITE, you should provide compelling benchmark data. And there you should prove that application is scalable for your particular problem, obviously, so that the application can run examples at the production level with the science you propose. And if you cannot show proof of runs at the proposed production scale, then provide at least a very tight story about how you would succeed. And there's a tip here. So do make the benchmark example as similar to your production runs as possible, or make it clear why another benchmark example is valid for your proposed work. Okay, next one. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we can discuss these startup accounts. So basically, these are smaller allocations for you to run a preparation work for the INCITE. So they call director discretionary, short DD, and they can be submitted anytime during the year. Well, obviously, if you're planning to submit INCITE this year, then you should do it basically now, yeah, because it's less than 2 months. And if you need to get access to the machines, just do it today afternoon. So DD, they can be requested for porting, tuning, scaling, all kind of preparational work from the INCITE. And yeah, basically you would need at least 2 months. So the procedure is very informal. It's not that much work. Just follow the links we have here at the bottom of these slides. And then it is just an online form, pretty straightforward. All right, next one. Yeah, so this is the final check about the narrative, and your narrative, if everything fine, you go for INCITE, it should contain. So it should contain an executive summary, it's 1 page. It should contain the bulk is a project narrative, including impact of the work, objectives, benchmarking. So that's a bulk, 15 pages, but it should also have to contain personal justification, management plan, as we discussed, the milestone table, again, as we discussed, and publications, and PI and co-PI bio sketches. So that's it. That's a narrative of the INCITE. And next slide. Yeah, basically we're back to Katherine. She would have a few more remarks, and then we can go deeper into the question and answers. All right, thanks.
All right, so generally, what I want people to sort of take out of that, right, is that this is sort of some guidance to think through what you're going to be putting into your proposal and sort of what will go forward. In the process of writing your proposal, my apologies, my computer really wants to move slides before I'm ready. You will go to the PeerNet site. That's all linked through the INCITE webpage, doeleadershipcomputing.org. And a few things, right? One of them that's just really valuable to know is that you can save your proposal at any time. I recommend that you do, right? So there are some things that are uploaded files, but some things that are forms that you will fill out on the site. And that includes, for example, your expressing interest in the AI or the quantum test beds, since they, that's sort of like this, like a little, an add-on to some respect, right, of your proposal. But all of that material can be saved at any point. There are required fields that they'll make that evident to you. So just pay attention to that. But fundamentally, we do need to have compliance with the requirements for the proposal. So the fields that you need to be filled in, the format we need, we do need to see that we do need to have compliance. In addition, after submitting your proposal, you will, so let's say like you were on a roll and finished it in early June, if you submit it, you will still be able to edit. If you realize you want to update something or change something, you'll be able to edit and resubmit all the way up to the submission deadline. So there's no penalty for submitting early, right? You can go back if you realize there's something you want to change. I alluded to this earlier, but how are decisions made? The decisions are made in October, taking primarily the input from the science panels, and then looking at other considerations, such as the computational readiness of the proposals, or if they're from an area where we're trying to encourage more presence in HPC, or if they're representing, if they're in an unrepresented community in HPC. The awards committee is the center directors, the program manager for INCITE, and the directors of science. We often pull in our science and technology staff to fold into that process, to sort of collect their input, and even to collect, sort of the summaries of what's been going on in the science panels. And I had mentioned this, but I want to really make sure this is clear. The computational readiness review is very important, right? We really treat that as this risk assessment, how hard will it be for your project to move forward or not on the resources, but it is not the primary decision factor. The very first thing is we look at those top rated science proposals from the science panels and work our way through the portfolio from there. And so going back to that, right, that portfolio is we do look to have some sort of balance. We want to make sure that awarded projects have enough time to actually accomplish their goals, but we might have to cut your project. So we are looking for that in the proposal. So there are occasionally times where projects take haircuts, and we are being very conscientious if we do that those haircuts are not prohibitive for what would be impactful with your proposal. We are looking for a balance in overall representation in the INCITE portfolio. So it is improbable that you'd see a year that was entirely from one domain. We really do try to distribute it across different areas of research. But one of the other big deciding factors in how many proposals are awarded is the support model for INCITE. So every INCITE project has a staff member assigned to it from OLCF or ALCF. And that support staff, right, is a computational scientist who has a decent fraction of their time specifically allocated to support your project, right? So we really also need to make sure that we have those support staff in place so this is actually often a limiter in how many proposals we might consider to award. As I've mentioned a couple times, when centers are oversubscribed, we really might do these haircuts, and so, or we might make larger cuts. So the larger cuts are often driven by panel guidance. So a panel might read your proposal and be very excited about one component of the proposal and might say that, but these follow-up two could be cut, or we're not excited, or we have concerns about them. This is explicit guidance we ask actually of the panels. And so we listen to that, right? So if we are looking or need to adjust a proposal, we will make that kind of cut as well. We will tell you very clearly that that's the guidance we have. We're awarding you this amount of time to do this part of your proposal. There is an appeals process. If you are rejected from and you do not get an award, it can be submitted directly to the INCITE program manager, me, or to the ALCF and OLCF center directors. And so primarily that appeals is to make sure that there was not an error in the decision-making process, sort of a procedural or clerical. And we don't make a reassessment of the scientific merit in that appeals process. We will announce in November, so that gives us normally a little hair under 2 months, because we tend to target early November, a hair under 2 months to get everybody ramped up, to get people on the systems and ready to go. And you will be hearing a lot from the facilities that you're awarded time at as soon as those awards are made. And in addition to the sort of just getting started, getting accounts, getting familiar with the facility, you will also then be assigned your scientific liaison or your catalyst from the respective facilities. I will let you know a couple key responsibilities to consider. So we have expectations for our PIs, remembering that these awards can be worth millions of dollars if you turn that into the cost of the machine and the staff to support your project and the systems. The primary one is that we ask quarterly status updates. And really in this case, it's checking in on where you are in your milestones, but also checking in if you have had relevant publications or journals or posters, any scientific output that we need to capture, because we actually need to capture that from your projects. This is a requirement from DOE. And one of the other requirements we have from DOE is to highlight the work that you are doing. So we need science stories. And so sometimes these are, technical highlights, like, you've improved performance of your application, or you've worked with us to do something interesting with your IO. But of course, it's also focused on the more impactful things for the science community, which is if you have good publications that we want to bring forward and shine the light on your hard work. You will be required to submit your annual renewal or a new proposal if you want your application to your allocation to continue. There's an annual survey that we ask for. It is relatively quick and I think relatively painless from my perspective. But the other one is we encourage your team also to be good citizens on the computers, right? There are policies in place. And of course, every policy or rule in place can be broken and people can find wiggle rooms to exploit it. We ask everyone just to try to be respectful and understand that they are shared resources. And you can even talk to your liaison on your catalyst and also the general facility support, even to sort of understand, subtleties there, because sometimes there are subtleties. Primarily, let us know the challenges you're facing, but also let us know the achievements and the successes that you have. We really love those successes. DOE loves those successes. We really love supporting your work and making sure people hear about it. We do have center meetings, right? We have workshops and user meetings. We encourage you to participate in those as applicable to you, right? And you will hear plenty about those different opportunities as a project at the facilities. We also ask that for any publication that you acknowledge the program. And this is the official acknowledgement that you can use. This is also on the websites for the facilities. But this is very important, as you can imagine, because as you know, sort of the metric in many cases is really publications, and tracking this acknowledgement is actually a key part for how we prove that we're contributing to the community. I also ask, right, and this is more of a favor, right, that if you are being successful and the LCFs and the INCITE program are significantly impacting your work and improving the quality of your work, please let the people who fund you know that. It does come around, right? We do hear those things, and it can make a really big difference for us and in terms of, sort of the management of everything moving forward. And also contact us, right? So please, if you have questions, we want to hear from you. We want to understand concerns that you have or thoughts you might have about the program. All right, and finally, these are just the contact information. Again, these slides will be available. So we just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that, if you need to contact either facility or the program, this is how you can do it very quickly. And then there are links to requesting a discretionary award for both facilities here as well. All right, so sorry. At this point, we are done with the primary material, and we want to make sure that we get to any additional questions, or, we've been trying to keep on top of it in the chat if there are additional questions that people have, or even following up from some of the answers that you might have received in chat. So I'll pause for a moment, and I believe I have said it, so you may unmute yourself, or you can put them in the chat and we will read them. No worries either way. We're pretty quiet today. I think we did try to stay on top of questions as we were walking through this. Does everyone who was, there were quite a few interactions about readiness for Frontier and using Summit data. Did everyone who was asking that, do they understand the answers to their questions, right? Do you want to dig into any of those questions a little deeper?
Let me, Catherine, let me clarify a couple of things for Frontier, just to make sure everybody's clear. When assessing the computational readiness for Frontier, obviously scaling data on a GPU machine is required, just like it would be on Summit. If possible, having some performance data, it won't be necessarily scaling data on an AMD GPU, is very helpful. If you have access to a center machine, they are limited access. That's even more helpful. If you don't, then we will try to do our best at evaluating computational readiness. When requesting Frontier, remember it's requested in Frontier node hours, not Summit equivalent. And you do need to look at the hardware of what Frontier is to try to best assess that requirement. So we're not going to provide a hard, fast rule of here's a scaling factor to go from Summit to Frontier. If you're unsure of your requirements, I encourage you to reach out to the center, to OLCF, and we can try to help give you some guidance. The other thing to remember is Summit is available the first year. So if you'd like to do Summit for your first year in Frontier, for subsequent years, in order to give you time to better prepare for Frontier, that's certainly acceptable and understandable. So with that, if there's any follow-up, of course, we're happy to answer it.
So there's a question on the liaisons and catalysts. If the INCITE allocation is given, will the staff be the same as those accompanying us in a DD proposal? And it's actually a fantastic question. And what I'll tell you is that we often endeavor to do that, right? It often makes sense that if there is an individual who is familiar with a project, that they are obviously a natural fit to be a potential catalyst, or liaison, although there's no guarantee necessarily. It kind of depends on a handful of criteria, but we do endeavor to do it. Like, to give you a sense, not to be too ambiguous about it, because I don't like being too ambiguous. It can be, for example, if that catalyst or liaison works, maybe has 50% of their time available, say, to be a catalyst liaison, or if there are many other projects are already engaged in, maybe it's challenging to slice it up exactly the right way, but we do try to. And in much the same way, we try to be consistent about a catalyst or liaison over time. So if you are an INCITE project, and you won't necessarily be hopping around to different catalysts and liaisons every single time you get an award. I will say it's kind of a wild year right now for INCITE at 5 resources. This is the most we've had in the program before. We have often had the transition, right, of one resource to another, but 5 resources is a lot for 2023. So there's a lot of moving parts, and we appreciate everyone's engagement with all of those moving parts. All right, I noticed people sort of dropping off too, and I don't want to keep people longer than necessary. So if there are no more questions, we can go ahead and end the call. And I'll just remind you that you can reach out with questions in email to me as the program manager, to me or Bronson as the directors of science for the facilities, or if you already know someone at the facilities, absolutely reach out to them. They should absolutely be able to provide you with some guidance on your INCITE award if you're our INCITE project proposal, if you're already working with someone. But reach out. There's no reason for you to sit in ambiguity or unsureness about a question. We really, it is exciting to us when we have an incredible crop of amazing proposals, all of them ready and awesome. And that's our preferred situation. Although it's a very hard one, it's a preferred situation. So we want everybody to really do well. And I appreciate your time this morning or afternoon, depending on where you might be. Thanks for joining us, everyone.